We're here to bring a new type of news show.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Bringing news just for you. It's Tuesday, December 16th here in Seoul. I'm Lee Soo-jin, and this is News Generation. Joining us today is Haeyoung.
Happy Tuesday, everyone.
Happy Tuesday, and also Julian's with us. Happy Tuesday. Both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. So it's only the second day of the week, and many of us are still easing into our routines. But sometimes, as we go about our everyday lives, we're reminded of how much the people who raised us have shaped who we are today. So that brings us to today's question. So as you get older, Haeyoung, do you find there are moments when you feel a deeper sense of respect for your parents?
Oh, definitely. I married and had children relatively early by today's standards. But thinking about my parents at this same stage of life really hits me. They were even younger, yet carrying so much responsibility. And my father became the main provider, the breadwinner of my house when he was still in his 20s, and he worked long hours for years. And back then, going to work on Saturdays was normal.
Right.
And my mom, on the other hand, raised us, my younger sister and me, mostly on her own while keeping the household running. And what amazes me is that they did all of this without the kind of support systems we have today. There were no daycare centers like we have now, no government childcare programs, and no online communities for parents, and no dawn delivery for daily necessities. And sometimes I honestly wonder how they managed it all on their own. And when I think about that, I can't help but feel a deep sense of respect and gratitude for what they endured so quietly.
Right, I hear that people feel that a lot, especially when they have their own children.
Yes, that's right.
Do you feel that that's also true for you too?
I have become a new person.
What about you, Julian?
Oh, of course I do. The older I get and the longer I deal with real life responsibilities, the deeper my appreciation for my parents have become. Now, I've only worked for a fraction of the time my parents have, and seeing how they not only had to provide for themselves, but also for their kids too, is something I feel very, very deeply grateful and have a lot of respect for. Now, they immigrated to the US about 30 years ago, and while I was able to sympathize with the challenges, I was only able to fully empathize with the challenges of moving to a different country when I actually moved to Korea 2 years ago. But they definitely had it much harder than me, especially when you consider how they moved without knowing anyone in the country, language barriers, and how accessing information online wasn't anything. For example, like, they don't even have Google Translate as much. They don't have a lot of these online services or blogs that they can read to understand how other people, I guess, like, experience moving abroad. And even back then, international phone calls were about 25 cents a minute, so which is pretty crazy to think about today because we could FaceTime for free. But I'm sure as time goes on, especially my time living here in Korea, I'll gain an even deeper understanding of their sacrifices.
So I guess that's part of becoming an adult. You can understand what our parents went through. So we're going to dive deeper into this topic, but first, let's take a look at the screen. When we were young, our parents felt almost invincible, and maybe that's why misunderstandings were so common. But as we grow older, we begin to see the struggles they face and the sacrifices they made to give their children a better life. Still, differences remain. Values have shifted, perspectives have changed, and the generation gap is very much alive. So today on News Generation, we're highlighting the realities and differences that still persist and exploring what it might take to bridge those divides. As we just saw in a video, there are deeper generation gaps that exist today that shape how parents and children see each other. And there are certain long-held ideas about what a successful life looks like, especially the belief that older generations enjoyed stable careers, secure homes, and a predictable future. But as these stories remind us, that image may be more fragile than it appears. So we often think of older generations as having lived stable lives, but how accurate is that perception really, Haeyoung?
I think we often talk about older generations through a very simplified image of success. We imagine a life where someone owns a home in Seoul, graduates from a good university, and joins a major company right after they graduate and stays there for decades, steadily moving up the ladder while investing heavily in their children's education. And it's true, many people from that generation did live what we now call a model or stable life. And for a long time, that that path was widely seen as the definition of success. But when you look more closely, that stability often came at a cost. Work-life balance was something many had to just give up. And behind the surface, their lives were far more fragile than we tend to remember. Some were laid off without warning after years of loyalty to a single company, and others lost businesses they had spent decades building when economic crises hit, or even saw their retirement savings disappear overnight. So I don't think their lives can be judged by a single polished image. Like any generation, their stories are filled with success and failure, sacrifice and regret, joy and heartbreak. So it's really hard to generalize it.
Right, and what you said reminds me of a Korean drama that's actually become really popular in English. I think it's called The Dream Life of Mr. Kim.
Yes.
And it highlights how in Korea, the definition of success, especially during that generation, is like a steady job, a house in Seoul, and then a family. But it also shows how, how easily it unravels and how hard it is. And it also really challenges the idea that stability and security, and even lives we once saw as successful, carried hidden risks and sudden turning points. So where does this generation stand now, caught between expectations from the generation above them and also below them, Julian?
Yeah, they really are in a tough position where they're both expected to deliver results and take responsibility for their superiors. Now, at the same time, they're also expected to approach new ideas and show flexibility towards junior employees. But because of the high expectation from both sides, they're also referred to as the sandwich generation. Now, I just talked about the workplace, but this burden isn't just felt in the workplace too. It's also felt at home. Gen X parents are in their 80s and 90s, and because of their age, there is a sense of responsibility to support them financially. Now, at the same time, their children in their 20s and 30s are often facing more unstable futures and careers and may need to rely on their parents for financial support. So having to support not only their parents but also their children is a huge financial burden, and as a result, both the economic and emotional burden is not concentrated just on one side, but because it's simultaneously carried from both above and below, it can be a lot of pressure for them.
So like you said, the pressure doesn't just flow in one direction. It's coming from both sides at once. And it's not just financially, it also happens emotionally as well. But has this also widened the gap in how different generations see today's reality, Taeyeon?
Yeah, I think this has widened the gap in how different generations see today's reality. I often hear people from older generations say, oh, young people these days are blessed with all the support from their parents, like financial support. Back in the days, like 나때는 말이야, we had to build everything we have now through pure hard work without much help from our own parents. And that may be true on like a personal level, but sometimes I feel older generations just overlook the reality, characteristics of the era they lived in, what some might even call structural advantages. In the past, effort and time were more directly rewarded, largely because Korea was going through a period of rapid economic growth. But if you enter the right university, there were periods when a stable job at a large company, big conglomerates, was almost guaranteed, regardless of grades. But today, there are barriers that individual effort alone can't easily overcome. Even top students with strong GPAs and impressive resumes struggle in a highly competitive job market. And housing is another example. Recent data suggests that buying a home in Seoul can take more than a decade of saving, assuming you even have a stable long-term job. So for many in the MZ generations, securing that kind of stability itself has become the hardest part.
Right, so I could definitely say the rules of the game has changed.
Harder.
Right, because back in our parents' day, like if you did work hard, you'll get promoted and you'll get a good job.
That's
and then you'll eventually be able to afford a house, because you mentioned housing during the latter part of your thing, and then you'd be able to buy a house in Seoul. But now
nothing is guaranteed.
Nothing is guaranteed. That's not true. So how do older generations view this shift, especially when they believe success came through hard work, Julian?
Well, yeah, this generation's catchphrase is, if you work hard, you can succeed. Now, many believe that they had it harder than other generations, but if you look at the history, you can, I guess, kind of understand why they feel that way. Our parents' generation lived through and struggled with numerous social challenges, such as post-war industrialization, the Asian financial crisis, long working hours, and political instability with periods of military dictatorship. However, the reality shows that this catchphrase, if you work hard, you can succeed, is not exactly black and white. The younger generation do feel a deep sense of uncertainty amid the tough current job market, social structures, and other instabilities that currently we're facing right now. And the uncertainty is also felt when thinking about the future. And if they can see that even working at a major corporation doesn't guarantee a secure retirement, you can get laid off at any second, then what really is the best way to set themselves up for success? And this idea is not even just our generation. I think it applies to literally anybody in this current society.
Right, I agree. And it's a reminder that hardship looks different depending on the era, and comparison alone clearly doesn't always lead to understanding. Both generations are responding to very real pressures shaped by completely different social and economic systems. And respecting past sacrifices and acknowledging present anxiety don't have to be mutually exclusive. So we also wanted to find out what you thought too. So we asked on the Arirang News YouTube channel, what is the greatest hardship do you think that was faced by your parents? So here's what the results showed. So the top concern was the dual burden of supporting both children and elderly parents at 57%. This was followed by anxiety about insufficient retirement prep at 22%. Next came other concerns at 12%, while the loss of role or purpose after retirement ranked lowest at 9%. So these numbers show that many parents aren't just thinking about themselves, they're carrying responsibility in both directions. They're thinking about how are they going to take care of their own parents and also their children. So to get another view on this, we'll be speaking with a longtime corporate professional, and that conversation will come right after the break, so don't go anywhere.
NewsGen wants to hear from you. Go to YouTube and search out channel Arirang News. Click Posts and cast your vote in the poll. Make a new type of news with us.
Joining us today is Lee Jung-hee, who has 20 years of experience in the corporate medical field. Hello, thank you so much for connecting with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So there's a perception that older generations had an easier path to success. So you had 2 decades of experience. So what was your experience actually like?
Looking back, it's undeniable that my generation lived through an era of rapid expansion. If you work hard and follow the company manual, there was a relatively clear ladder to climb. So I understand why the younger generation might see our paths as easier or at least more predictable. However, the reality on the ground was quite intense in a different way. We often call it in the era of growth without safeguard. For most of my 20s and 30s, the concept of work-life balance simply didn't exist. We sacrificed our time with family and our personal health. I'm IMF generation, so I saw colleagues and mentors lose their jobs overnight. The lessons that we learned wasn't about easy success. It was about survival. We lived with the constant fear. The anxiety drove us to work even harder. So was it easier? In terms of opportunity for expansion, perhaps yes. But in terms of the human cost and the pressure of survival without a safety net, it was a brutal time. I look at the younger generation today and I see them fighting in a much more sophisticated, hyper-competitive global arena. They face a different kind of monster, low growth and high uncertainty. I don't think one generation had it easier than the other. We climb a steep mountain with a heavy load, while the younger generation is trying to navigate a foggy jungle without a map. I think we are just walking different paths.
I see. Like you just shared, you must have faced many challenges along the way. But then, what helped you stay resilient through a long career in the corporate world?
First, it was a sheer weight of reality. For a long time, my husband was a student, which meant I was the breadwinner. Second, I held on to one principle: never let your mood become your attitude. I trained myself to separate my emotion from my work. Consistency was my strategy. Even on my worst days, I showed up, smiled, and did what needed to be done. Lastly, it was a sense of duty as a woman in a male-dominated generation. I was often the only woman in the room. I felt a heavy pressure that if I fail, people won't say just I failed, but that women couldn't handle it. I didn't want to set a bad precedent for junior female colleagues coming after me. And more than that, the pure joy of achieving something difficult with my team, that shared success was addictive. It made all the hard times worth it.
Great. And just to wrap things up, if there's something that you wish people in their 20s and 30s better understood about your generation?
I think the privilege the younger generation has is the freedom of choice and the validity of diverse values. In my generation, the definition of success was very linear and uniform. However, people in their 20s and 30s today live in a world where being different is celebrated and there are multiple paths to success. So we built our career in an era of information scarcity, relying heavily on grid and face-to-face network. So if sometimes you think we are so obsessed with experience or tenacity, please understand that these were the only tools we had to navigate a rapidly changing world. I think you are digital natives, so if we combine your digital intuition with our experience, can create amazing synergy. And also, the younger generation has the privilege of defining the rules. You have the tool and the mindset to challenge the status quo, whereas we were just trained to follow and optimizing existing rule. One thing I wish you understand about us is that our intensity comes from living through a period of rapid industrialization, whereas stopping meant falling behind. We are not trying to be rigid. We are just used to a pace where survival depended on immediate result. I hope we can learn from your flexibility, and perhaps you can also find some values in our resilience.
You're right. I think there's definitely things that both generations can learn from each other. And for instance, I mean, you said you worked 20 years in one field, which I think is amazing. I can see why you did that. You mentioned how, you thought it was really important to not let your mood become, the way you treat other people, which I think is also really hard to do. Something I still struggle with every day, to be honest. And also, and then you made some really good points about how, as a woman too, there's pressure there too. So, I mean, just listening to you talk about this, I also learned a lot today, and I can see why you were able to work for 20 years, which is truly commendable. Also, so thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we just spoke to a corporate veteran about what a long career really looks like behind the scenes and what she hopes that the younger generation better understands about her generation. We've also talked a lot about the pressures facing the younger generations today, from job insecurity to growing anxiety about the future. Yet these realities are often misunderstood from the outside. So, Taeyang, we've heard a bit about this from our Zoom interviewee, but are there some common misunderstandings that older generations have about the younger generation? What are some of them?
Well, one common misunderstanding is that when younger people change jobs frequently, it's because they lack patience or commitment. In reality, many are navigating a job market dominated by short-term contracts, relatively low pay, and increasingly intense workloads. And staying in one place isn't always a sign of stability anymore. It can sometimes mean enduring conditions that simply are not sustainable. And another misconception is that the younger generation prioritizes personal happiness or self-worth because they are irresponsible or self-centered. But I see it differently. In a future that feels uncertain and unpredictable, finding small, meaningful moments of happiness in the present is often a way of coping, not escaping. So it's how many people keep themselves going rather than giving in to anxiety about what lies ahead.
Right, so like you said, I feel like the younger generation tends to put more value on work-life balance, and there's
right.
nothing wrong with that. So what are the realities that young people are facing, Julian?
Yeah, well, there is a perception that our generation is generally lazy and they don't really want to put the effort in to build up their wealth and career. But people can really misunderstand this because of the number of young people classified as economically inactive due to rest have reached an all-time high. But this doesn't mean that they're unemployed because they're lazy. Now, many people have actually, unfortunately, lost a lot of hope because of constant rejection and failures that they get from applying for jobs or trying to find something that really helps with their career. Now, millennials and Gen Zers are also working really hard to grow in their respective fields and trying to navigate a turbulent world. So if they need to rest a little bit, they, they really do deserve it. But I don't think that misunderstanding or the conception that they're lazy is not exactly right.
Right, so we talked about misunderstandings that are happening on both sides. So the question is, what can we do moving forward? So do you have any ideas about this, Hale?
I think moving forward starts with mutual understanding rather than just trying to decide who's right or who's wrong. And older generations may need to recognize how much the structural realities have changed since the time they went to university, entered the workforce, and built their careers. The paths that once led to stability don't always exist in the same way today. And at the same time, younger generations also need to acknowledge that many of the systems and opportunities we now take for granted were built through the hard work and sacrifices of those who came before us. So yeah, reducing generational conflict isn't about just like saying who's comparing struggles, but it's about understanding.
I agree. So Dave, what are your thoughts on this?
Everything you said, I agree. So just to add off of it, misunderstandings are generally one of the root causes of the conflicts between generations, and it really isn't fair to make assumptions about one another without acknowledging the actual real struggles that each generation faces, especially since each struggle is very unique and is very connected to their own generation too. And especially in our world where everything just moves so quickly, it's not only challenging to navigate one's own path and process of becoming, but also to work towards a more, I guess, secure and hopeful future. It's just a lot of work, and that comes with its own struggles. And yeah, we all live in different times, so I think it's really important for all generations to really try to actively understand each other, because we all have our own struggles, and we should be able to more sympathize with each other to make things easier and happier for all of us.
We all
Right.
need empathy.
Empathy is really important,
For each other.
right? So in the end, it isn't about deciding which generation had it harder, but about understanding how that the world they each grew up in shaped their choices and their fears. So different generations live their different systems, but the pressure to provide and endure is something they all share. So when we look beyond stereotypes, we begin to see not just generational conflict, but shared uncertainty and shared responsibility. And when we try to understand where each generation is coming from, we will have already completed the first step toward easing the divide between them, as we have hopefully done together today. So that brings us to the end of today's episode of News Generation. But News Gen will be back tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. Korea time with more stories and discussions. A big thanks to Hale.
Always pleasure.
Thanks for coming in. Also, Julian.
Thank you for having me.
And to our viewers, thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope you have the best day. We are News Generation.